Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we finally have from Cindy Lee, Diamond Jubilee. So one of the strangest experiences as a music critic is to watch an act that has had some very niche underground hype suddenly become every critic's darling. I've talked about this before. Normally it comes for precisely one album that soars to the top of year-end lists before usually being quickly forgotten, alongside everything else the act might do before and after, and it might not be even that far removed from their usual sound. And even with that qualification, Cindy Lee seems like a particularly strange case. The drag act of Patrick Flegel, former lead singer of Canadian late 2000s underground indie rock darling band Women, where after they fell apart, their brother went on to form Preoccupations and make a lot of post-punk that I really like. But Cindy Lee stayed more consistently underground, although in 2020 they did see a modest critical breakthrough with What's Tonight to Eternity, which took the haunted, lo-fi, psychedelic, occasionally noisy edges of hypnagogic pop to surround something compositionally that felt more like vintage 60s baroque pop. I think I like that project more as a textural experience than for standalone compositions. It's one of the two albums I could actually find on streaming. Cindy Lee also put out another album that same year that I heard and didn't quite click, but this new project operated on a different level of distance and inaccessibility. You could only get it through a download through a rather janky website with limited metadata on the files, or one continuous YouTube video, something intentionally reminiscent of the most obscure underground acts of decades past. And of course that leads to mountains of critical acclaim, because critics in today's age, especially those who remember the 2000s, they love few things more than a good exclusivity gimmick to make them ahead of the curve. But after Cindy Lee abruptly canceled their tour, all we were left with was the double album, a solid 32 tracks over 2 hours. And I can't be the only one who isn't quite as enamored with this. Like with What's Tonight to Eternity, the feel of Diamond Jubilee is of a sprawling, lost artifact from a different time, where the creaking, lo-fi textures, the thick cushion of reverb, and especially the eerie synths on the back half, they surround something reminiscent of obscure vinyl you would find digging in the crates, or a transmission from a public access radio station decades past, where the haunted mystique has you wondering what might have been, what you found, framed as all the more impressive as Patrick Flegel bends across voices and gender to showcase some really impressive talent. And especially as you just let this album wash over you, especially on the back half, it's designed to construct the dreamlike questions of what might have been. What Flegel is doing compositionally isn't that unique in terms of construction if you know your hallmarks of 1960s baroque pop, psychedelic rock, progressive rock, even some soft rock and country. Everything will feel distinctly familiar, from some of the hard panning to every trick in Phil Spector's playbook, enough that might have you wondering what queer voices playing in this space have been lost to decades past, who deserved but never got the spotlight despite the talent to have it. Especially as it is genuinely impressive how many distinctive melodic flourishes and detours that Flegel will take. And on over 30 songs, on volume, there is a lot to highlight. From the sticky lead riff of the title track, Demon Bitch and Stone Faces, the ramshackle guitar interplay against the steady groove of Always Dreaming, the weedy gloss of the synths off the punchier rattle and the bass on Flesh and Bone that careens into this noisy breakdown where, after a short interlude, erupts into this wheedling, folk-infected prog rock of Kingdom Come, the haunted, gothic swell of Till Polarity's End, and some of the oily synthwave pulse of GAYBLEVISION, the Lockstepp groove of If You Hear Me Crying with its numerous weird guitar swerves, or just how the gauzy synths and the strings reflect each other melodically on the end of each disc for some rather effective, blissful yearning. But of course, this is all in a conceptual framework in which to consider Diamond Jubilee. The other side of which is that being a deliberately nostalgic hypnagogic sound and some janky marketing to evoke nostalgia is covering for a rather bloated double album that is coasting on that dreamlike experience to skip past some deeper examination upon waking. Or the context that Bandcamp is stuffed full with dozens of acts playing to precisely this exact palette in various forms, often trying to construct sharper hooks or say a little bit more in the writing. As much as Ariel Pink's catalog has been well, revealing in retrospect. The sunburnt, toxic outsider nihilism, it was a thematic focal point beyond just aesthetic nostalgia, where many of the winsome songs of love lost and found here, they don't really feel like they're adding up to more in the content, outside of a couple distinctly queer Canadian reference points and clinging onto performance and art and connection in the face of a strange and often openly hostile world. And even there, that feels like teasing fragments to a more interesting picture that's kind of blurry, not really fleshed out. And that's not even to get into the other structural issues beyond the length, where songs will often just abruptly stop or swerve, leading to a flow that's more disjointed than you might expect. And while some will argue that the ragged lo-fi presentation, that's all part of the charm, when you pair it with vocals and especially drum work that is a lot more inconsistent, especially on the more nocturnal second disc that really drags hard and where the rhythm section can get a lot clumsier, it leaves the feeling that the overall experience could have been captured with a much tighter runtime, maybe accentuate a few of the better hooks. And it leaves me frustrated about this album because it feels like I'm supposed to be a lot more impressed with the novelty of this release than I actually am. Putting aside how I just don't have critical nostalgia for blog era release tactics and the faux exclusivity, Flagel proves that they can indeed be a jack of all trades in the composition, the performance, and production. It's impressive, but once you look past the glamour, I'm not sure there's mastery of any of it, especially when tighter focus could have led to greater yields on individual songs that might punch a little harder. That is not saying this is bad by any means. On a textural level, to so effectively hit this atmosphere, it's impressive, and there are a couple scattered gems, and on some level, I hear that magic that's enraptured so many folks. I do get it, but I'm just more lukewarm on Diamond Jubilee as a whole. It just can't sustain that resonance for me. It's absolutely worth your listen if you want to put in the time and you're curious. Just temper some of your expectations. Hope that the rediscovered memory sticks a little deeper, at least this time. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. I know that I'm going to get backlash for this just because this is one of the most highly acclaimed albums of this year. I read those reviews, I watched a few of those reviews, I get it, but again, I feel like I'm almost being a little punked by the fact that so many people are enraptured by the mystique of it, but once you look a little further deeper, it's just a little shallow, it's a little thin. It implies more than it actually delivers on, and that feels like it's kind of frustrating. There's an ambiguity I can respect in the mystique of the art, but at the same time, I'm not sure it makes up for all the structural foibles and elements that don't quite work as well as you might hope. But beyond that, I'm sure there's going to be debate around that. Comments down there, have fun. And if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if y'all want to get involved in helping support the channel, or just yell at me on my Discord, or get albums onto my schedule for when this comes out, or when the schedule reignites back in July. Again, this has been on my schedule for a while, but when you have 2 hours of pretty odd music, you can understand why it took a while. But if you want to change that, link to my Patreon is right over there. Don't feel obligated. Tough times, I understand. Options available. Till then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.